Welcome to Consciously Unbiased LinkedIn Live. Consciously Unbiased is about promoting diversity and inclusion in the workplace and sort of moving the movement forward. Today's topic is authentic allyship. It's how to show up at work to create real change with special guest Nicole Mitchell, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Cedars Sinai, Ryan Lathrum, Senior Director in Diversity and Inclusion at BounceX, and then Adrian Taylor, Director of Diversity at Premier Health. To start off with, I'd love for you guys to tell us a little about your backgrounds and what you guys do and what Consciously Unbiased says to you. Nicole, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, good morning here from LA. Good afternoon to everybody else. My name is Nicole Mitchell. I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Cedars Sinai in Southern California. We're based in Los Angeles, and my role is really to help us look from an organizational perspective on how to build a diversity and inclusion program, and really that sense of belonging internally and externally. We definitely approach this from a health equity standpoint. We are a healthcare organization, and we are actually an academic healthcare organization. So we have amazing research and educational programs that are here as well. I have the pleasure of knowing all three of these individuals from different parts of my life. So I'm so excited to be here with them. But Consciously Unbiased is what that means to me is really continuing this conversation, bringing light to biases that exist and allowing us to be aware of those things, and just continuing to push forward in this journey for our diversity and inclusion for society, particularly right now as we're seeing a lot of racism and the discussion about what anti-racism means. I think knowing where your biases lie is a really important part of that.
Thank you. Yeah. Adrian, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Adrian Taylor. I'm here in Dayton, Ohio at Premier Health. We large employer in our region with 5 hospitals, 13,000 employees, and I'm responsible for our supply diversity program and our diversity and inclusion efforts for our organization. Been here about 5 years, going on 6 years here. And what consciously unbiased means to me is being, in a word, woke. It's being aware of those biases that exist and, quite frankly, doing something about it. So it could mean being frail in a moment. It could mean being fearful. It could even mean being nervous and having some anxiety. But it always means moving in the direction of being more woke, more productive, and ensuring that there's equity at an organization or organization that you're a part of.
Thank you. Love it. And then Ryan, you're next.
Yeah, cool. Well, first, thanks, Ashish and Unconsciously Biased for having me, and thanks to Nicole for introducing me to all these wonderful people. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Ryan Lathrum, and I work for BounceX, soon to be Wunderkind, and I lead our diversity and inclusion efforts there. We're a small, I think small, 300-person startup in New York City. And yeah, about diversity and inclusion at BounceX was started very grassroots. And so I came along about 18 months ago to help us put some structure and some policies and some organization into our full diversity and inclusion program. And I know sometimes, the structure word is a taboo word in startups. Nobody likes to have that sometimes. But I think from a diversity and inclusion perspective, and in order to get buy-in and, and amplify voices and elevate the profile of resource groups, there has to be some sort of, structure around that. And so that's what I do. And I love my job every single day, and I love the people that I work with. So if anyone's ever in New York City, come and find me. Love to chat. But Consciously Unbiased for me, also, wrapped up into exactly what Nicole and Adrian said as well. And it just always reminds me that also to be humble, just because in this position of the diversity and inclusion, doesn't mean that I don't have my own biases when it comes to, even how I think about things from a D&I perspective in the office, and making sure that I don't already jump to the other side of things, and really it keeps me to pause a little bit before sort of thinking about understanding different perspectives and knowing that I have a lot of work to do still. This is never ending.
Absolutely, well said. So Adrian, let's start with you. So I feel like we're sort of at a tipping point with BLM, right? And I think change can really happen. Why do you think white leaders are now on board with Black Lives Matter movement?
I'm going to refer to a podcast I recently heard, NPR podcast, Code Switch. One of the good podcasts that they do, and they identified three things. And I subscribe to some of this, and I think there's other reasons that others, perhaps Nicole and the others, could share. But definitely, they suggested and informed the listener that there's a positive peer pressure that's happening with white employees, not just white employees, but white America. So when you look at the protests, and I'm gonna get away from the conversation about riots, but when you look at the protests, the first time in history, you saw a lot of white protesters. You hear a lot of white people talking about the need for equality. We saw this all. And so with that comes a positive pressure, because we're talking about it. Why aren't you? Type of conversation that I'm not privy to those conversations, but they're happening in our country. And speaking of country, the second reason that they shared was the disdain in leadership that we are seeing from our president right now, and how people want to move away from that type of leadership. So it's grassroots, and people are in the streets. They are creating noise, and they want to see change. And so you see this body of work happening and taking place right in front of our eyes. We're a part of history, and all of us want to be on the right side of history in these moments. And then lastly, and obviously, is the quarantine and the pandemic. We have been a pent-up society, a lot of energy, a lot of work from home, a lot of social distancing, a lot of things are closed at establishments that we're normally going to. So people do nothing but surf the internet and participate on Zoom calls and calls like this. And so with those three things and the pot being stirred and on the eye at about 350, you see this energy around Black Lives Matter. I heard someone say that all lives can't matter until Black lives matter, right? And I agree with that. That is the right statement to make, and that's the right mindset to have. Getting behind something that historically had disenfranchised African Americans for hundreds of years. Now is the time. Quite frankly, it should have been a long time ago, but we'll take these moments and we'll see change in our world. And I believe those are three components, three things, if you will, that are moving us in this direction. I would love to hear from my friends on the call.
Yeah, I'd love to add that. I think that, the peer pressure, like you said, is positive, right? And I think that, we probably have a lot of leaders, particularly white leaders, who have wanted to speak out and have wanted to be part of this conversation. And the reality of the situation is we still have some conservative, systemic racism that exists, and leaders in some of those particular pockets or parts of society may have been nervous, even though they're the leaders of the organization. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you can still go and speak out. You still want your job, and you want to be, mindful of the words that you use. And I think that this positive peer pressure actually opens up that conversation, and it's given our leaders kind of more latitude to speak their mind and share and even name racism as a challenge in organizations. And, that's something we've done here at Cedars Sinai. And I think it's so important because it's changed kind of how we're handling discussions here. So I think the peer pressure is great. It's giving people kind of the freedom to do what maybe has been on their hearts for a long time, to speak out on some of these issues.
Yeah, I'd agree. There's a bit of and I think accountability is a huge part in there now too, right? Because it's these organizations and companies that have survived so long, doing the same thing over and over and over, right? Having these systemic racism policies in place, and hiring and promotions and all of that. They may have never called it that before, but if you now are able to take a seat back and really look at the makeup of your organization and people that have left the organization, people that you're hiring, that is now on full display, and that's going to ultimately filter back up to the leaders of the organization, the ones that so if you're not doing that, you're going to be, I see it all over LinkedIn, show me a picture of your executive team, and it's I bet a lot of companies are I want to go there. I don't want to do that, because they know that they're going to, right? But they have to be held accountable for that. And I love seeing that on LinkedIn too. And, my organization's not perfect. I'll be super transparent about it too, but we need to be sort of held accountable to be able to make that change in our organizations. And it's also not something that's happens overnight either, right? You can't like dismantle racism overnight in these systems overnight. And so we also have to be really clear, and organizations have to be really transparent about that with their employees around like this, we're working towards it. We hear you. This.
We lost him.
Months or years to be able to make that change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think this is an exciting time right now because I feel like traditionally, the government's kind of been our moral fiber, right? And companies have kind of taken a back seat and not taking an opinion on either side. But now I think it's kind of switched, and so it's exciting to see change really happen because the companies are making stands, and the ones who don't aren't going to survive. But going to your point, how is your company addressing Black Lives Matter in the workplace?
Yeah, well, we made some commitments to our organization, and internally we put that out publicly too. And I'm super proud of the things that we are actively working on. We committed to being better allies. We committed to some hiring goals, which we're still ironing out to be more sort of specific on those. But really, sort of the thought is like, we want to set goals, but like we have to also make sure first that like we can hire as many people of color, Black people, LGBT women, but like when they get to the organization, if there are not things in place to support them, then
that sense of belonging needs to be there.
That some of the things that we've done, so a few of our commitments are, we have this $1 million initiative, which is really cool. So we, BounceX, are offering our services pro bono to 7 to 8 Black-owned businesses, and for a year. And then we're also offering our services to 2 to 3 nonprofits that are fighting social justice, whether it's for the Black community or the Black trans community. And we also have a publishing wing of our organization, and we're working with Black-owned publishers as well. So we're offering BounceX pro bono for a year, and the goal of like getting $1 million in revenue for these for these Black-owned businesses, which is super cool. And we've already started. We've already landed. I don't know if that's the right word. I'm still not a business person. We already have our first client already booked. That's probably not the right way either. But so it's moving quickly, and we're super excited about that. So that's one of the things that we committed to. And but we also have to make sure that like, just because we're like doing this, it's like pat on the back and like everything's great now. Like, have to understand that like this isn't about, right? It's not about BounceX, and it's not about the people that are our employees that are working on this project. Like, just because we did this, like, doesn't mean that we've solved everything, right? So we have to make sure that like this isn't like, yeah, we win, we're the best, we're number one. I also look at it as like, we're doing this, and hopefully we can serve as an example to other companies that are just like us to potentially do the same. Thing. So it's not a competition, right? It's not like who's the best here and at supporting Black-owned businesses. The other thing that we're doing too, like when it comes to like, I think wrapped up into the inclusive hiring, and also wrapped into like being better allies, is we're going to be doing some healing racial trauma. We're spending the month of July focused on healing racial trauma, which is going to be really great. So we have 3 different sessions that will be focused on actionable allyship, understanding racial trauma, and healing racial trauma. So that's going to be something that will also live right in BounceX, and hopefully in perpetuity. It's not something that we're going to be like, great, we checked the box, like we've reacted to all this. Like, again, we're number one. We're going to be embedding all of that into, whether it's training or whether it's workshops, whether it's onboarding of new employees, specific management tracks. All of that is in the works. But again, that's not something it's something that I tell people all the time. That cannot happen overnight. Like we want to be like super methodical about how we're doing all of it. And then we're also going to do some anti-racism training after we do the healing racial trauma series. And that stuff will definitely that workshop, that training in particular, is going to live on for definitely forever. We will definitely be embedding that into where it makes sense into our organization.
I love it. I love the fact that you're trying to lead by example, because one of the things that we do at Consciously Unbiased is, rather than calling out the people that aren't doing the right things, let's amplify the people that are doing the right things, and hopefully that inspires other companies to do great things as well by just giving them a roadmap. Adrian, yeah.
Right.
Nicole, do you want to add to that? So what are you guys doing internally as well?
Yeah, the thing I'm proud of is a year ago, Cedars Sinai brought me, and then we've created a Chief Health Equity Officer position too. So we've been kind of building the foundational framework over the last year here at Cedars. And I think that that's important because when, everything kind of, I keep saying like the world definitely exploded on the discussion of racism over the last month, we were in the position that we had done some work. The one thing I'll say, we didn't communicate as much as we should have over that last year and saying, here's all the things that we've been doing. But because we have the foundational pieces in place, the biggest part that has come out is we've been having these amazing open dialogues with each other. And I'm a firm believer of how we create that sense of belonging within organizations is really through storytelling, right? Which is what we're all here doing today too. And we have had so many people from different backgrounds. And a lot of our Black employees tell their story to help our white employees and people from other backgrounds understand how racism exists, right? Just because maybe you are a top-notch surgeon here in the organization and you're Black, that doesn't mean that you don't face racism every day. And I think that that has been one of the things I'm most proud of, not necessarily an external thing, but as we're working on our culture here, to me, one of the most important things is making sure that our people are happy and they feel like they belong here and they have a voice. And I think doing and holding these conversations has allowed us to do that. And it's something that we want to continue. So it's not just something that we've done over these last few weeks as an answer to the world exploding. It's, also we had COVID on top of it and we're a healthcare institution. Right. So we've dealt with, Adrian, you understand, we've dealt with the pandemic of COVID that we're still dealing with. And then we're dealing with the pandemic of racism that was literally in our backyard. And, we had to face both of those at the same time. So one thing we did right after George Floyd's murder, and then we had the protests, and we actually did have some riots here in the Fairfax area in Los Angeles. We held a vigil with our employees, a virtual vigil, and it was led by myself, our spiritual care, our rabbi from spiritual care, and then our employee assistance program manager. And we just came together and just provided our employees with a chance to breathe together. I told my personal story as a Black woman and a mom, and a wife and a daughter-in-law. And, it was so fresh. I basically had to process my personal feelings in front of all of our employees. But I think that it was a chance to heal for myself. And also I hope for some of our employees. And we just gave each other a chance to breathe together as a Cedars Sinai family. And I think that that's one of the things I'm most proud about. We can do things externally. We do a lot of amazing community benefit work. We just finalized some donations to go to racial justice organizations, but we continue to do research and figure out how we can close gaps around health equity for the Black community particularly. And those are things that I'm proud of. And as Ryan said, it's a journey. It happens one tick at a time. It's not all going to happen overnight. And I feel like we're taking those steps. We do have to remind each other that it's not all going to happen overnight.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you guys did a vigil. We're actually, with Consciously Unbiased, for helping clients sort of do meditation and nonviolent communication to sort of get the point across. It's amazing that you guys are doing that as well. Yeah. Adrian, how about you guys?
Yeah, so some of the same as what Ryan and Nicole have said. I will echo that. This was all led by our president and CEO, Mary Busalas. The effort of her putting out a message and a subsequent video was very passionate and heartfelt. And it starts with leadership, right? So once that has gone out and been consumed, people understand that we're going to be about the work of providing, not a check the box like Ryan said, and that was a very good point, and that is a very cool hat, Ryan. But instead, we have provided. And we are compiling and completing and finalizing a plan that has an internal and an external component. Internally, we're going to be providing some training. Nicole and I have been talking about this going back and forth across the country, but we have been talking about and initiating a type of a series for our leadership so we can dig into racism and white privilege and micro and get comfortable in the uncomfortable space, right? And dealing with, we have and I want to say this too, our diversity and inclusion plan has been around for quite a few years. So it was easy for us to pivot and begin to do this work utilizing the platform that was already readily available for us. So our diversity committees that are at all of our major sites, we have begun the work of storytelling and sharing emotionally what this as Ryan put it, the trauma of racism has done, not just in this moment with George Floyd, but also with the exchange that Christian and Amy Cooper had in New York City, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of the others. This has been work that we already had a platform for, so we began to unpack it. And to Nicole's point, what she has successfully articulated is that there has to be a psychologically safe space created for me to share my story. So as an African-American executive in my organization, it's been necessary for me to get out front and speak with other executives and share my story. But quite frankly, others have shared with me that they had no idea that that was the life that an African-American leads. They see the executive and the person responsible for our program. But off the clock, to Nicole's point, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and all these other things in my life, and there are concerns that I have. So being able to share that story and breathe life to that in the organization and create a safe space. But as leaders, we're creating safe spaces for other people of color because, again, we have been disenfranchised and we don't necessarily know the full impact of our story, let alone how to utilize our voices. So it's necessary for us to create the pathway and the bridge so people can have that psychologically safe space to share their story and be authentic in that space. And whatever color vernacular that looks like, we need to begin to talk about race, racism, white privilege. So internally, again, creating these safe spaces, coming up with a plan for leadership, having these things echoed by our president and CEO, and ensuring that in every sector of our business that we are providing educational spaces as well. Because what I believe is this, we all have to arrive at ground zero. You have to understand the history of race and racism in our country in order to walk with me on this journey. You can't simply just show up and say, I want to do. I need you to understand some things. The death of George Floyd was the apex of a lot of things, a lot of history, a lot of time, a lot of brutality, a lot of slavery, a lot of killings, a lot of lynchings. We didn't just arrive here in that moment in May. So walk with me on the educational piece and stew in it a little bit, be uncomfortable in it a little bit, and then let's show up together. Because quite frankly, we've been uncomfortable for hundreds of years and we've lost our voice in that. So this is a moment in time where we need to walk together. Internally, we're creating those spaces. Externally, what we're looking at other stakeholders in our community right now who want to partner with us in a way that's going to create significant change. I believe in all of our respective cities, where Ryan is, where Nicole is, where I am. Just having these conversations alone should propel us to be the beacon for other organizations collaboratively. We should be a beacon in our state for a collaborative effort that utilizes across industries what we have designated, what we're going to do, what we've signed up to do together universally, to say that we're going to literally eradicate racism in every policy, in every attitude in our organization. So reaching out in our community to see who's willing to stand with us, that's a body of work. To Nicole's point, this is a marathon, a long marathon. This is not a sprint. There's no light switch for this. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get away from this overnight. So the sting and pain of this, we need to sit in it for a while. And we need to have long-term plans established that's going to help eradicate racism. That's what we're doing now. We're looking at that timeline and we're realizing that to dig in the right way, it's going to require time. And we're all going to be uncomfortable in this place for a while.
Yeah. No, that's a great point.
I think that's one of the things that we have to remember on this journey too. And, we're not all going to get it right. And we have to own that and we have to be comfortable, and it's going to be frustrating for some. But I think creating the spaces to voice that frustration is only going to help us get better and move along on this journey together. And, when one rises, we all are going to rise and we're going to be better. And it's going to spotlight conversations for different communities. And it's going to allow us to just create better kind of society and organizations. My belief is that as we continue these conversations, they're pointing us in the right direction. This feels different.
Yes.
The feeling is it's sticky this time. And I think that that's so important and it's different.
Yeah. Right. Things that, sorry.
I was going to say that, one of the points that Adrian brought up was about like being uncomfortable in uncomfortable situations and be able to have honesty and share sort of the emotional piece of it, right? And so I think the two things that I've been telling clients is like, one, you're doing a great job of messaging externally, right? And you're putting money into like NAACP and all these other different external things, but you have to do two things internally. One, if you're asking your Black coworkers to be vulnerable, right? There's a stress to that. So you also have to give them time off if you're going to ask them to share that way, to make sure you take care of them. And number two is, if you really want to change stuff in your organization, you're going to have to put budget towards it, right? And so I have a lot of friends who are doing trainings and clients are coming to them, but they're saying, hey, we don't have budget for it. And I'm like, let me get this straight. You're trying to move this thing forward. You're saying that Black people have been exploited for hundreds of years, and now you're asking them to help you for free, right? And so we have to be mindful of that and make sure that we're going back and creating the budgets that we may not have had, but we're not traveling right now, so you can allocate budgets from different parts of your organization to use towards creating systematic change. So speaking of that, Nicole, we talked about performative allyship. Can you kind of go through that and your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I chuckle because, I think allyship is such an important thing. And, I think when we were chatting before, we want people to do the research, right? We want people to learn, and we have to understand that when you are an ally, and, Ryan and I have had some discussions about this. He does some amazing training and work around allyship as well with his organization. But you have to remember that you can't say that you're an ally to a community without that community kind of giving you the stamp of approval, saying like, yes, you're walking the walk and talking the talk, right? Mm-hmm. And I think for the Black community and most communities, I think that's an important thing to remember in your allyship journey. So you need to do the research, and you need to understand, to Adrian's point, the history of the community that you are trying to be supportive of and be a voice for. One of the things that I have had kind of a love-hate relationship over these last few weeks is we have been providing lots of resources with books and articles, and we want people to read and learn. But what I'm seeing pop up across the country are book clubs. And that's going to be the answer to us fixing this racism problem. And it's kind of frustrating to me because, yes, I want people to dialogue about it and read and learn the history. But if that's all you're doing, and you're not taking what you're learning and sharing it with people outside of that group, because obviously that group has an interest, right? So you're kind of with your own peeps in that instance. But like, if you're not out there taking that and sharing it with people who might have a different viewpoint, if you're not asking questions at your organization, if you're not really talking to the people about what you're learning about their history or their background, I think that you're missing the whole allyship idea and what that means. So I'm a firm believer of allyship is walk the walk and talk the talk. And figuring out how you can listen, how you can be a supportive person and be an extra voice for the communities that you're trying to support. So performative allyship is a bit frustrating to me. I think it's like step one at the very, very foundation of the allyship journey. But there's so much more that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I could not agree more with everything that you just said. And I mean, one of the things that we always talk about at my organization is like allyship is not self-defined, right? Like you don't go to the allyship workshop and then after an hour you're like, I got the badge, I'm cool, I'm an ally for life now. And like it's just not how it works. And when we were talking a couple of days ago about it too, it's like everyone wants to be like perfect on this, right? But you are gonna mess up the entire way, but you have to be genuine. You have to be like sustainable in your allyship journey, right? But you also have to take care of yourself while you're doing this. A lot of what I've been also reading about allyship is that people are getting like super burnt out, and which because they went from 0 to 100 and how they're like in their allyship journey, and which is phenomenal, and that's great, and like we all welcome that, but like you also have to make sure you take care of yourself too, right? Being an ally is like taking care of your mental health and your emotional health and your physical health, and doing that and then getting back out there. But also know that like one of the things you two mentioned earlier, which I really loved, was like the storytelling piece. And so for me, like being a part of part of the allyship journey is listening, right, and believing them. And one of the things that I see a lot from people, like when they tell their stories around like whatever it is, like whatever story it is, whether it's your life experience, and a lot of times you find people going like, but really, is that really what happened? And like, you cannot dismiss somebody else's experience. Like, you need to, as hard as it is to maybe believe them because it's so far fetched from something that you've ever experienced, like, you got to actively listen and you got to believe them. And storytelling is part of all of that, right? So that's why I love the storytelling piece, because the more stories that you hear, right, the more, I think it prompts like more questions and more curiosity, which is what we also need from being an ally. But I think the main thing to take away from it is like, you don't get to call yourself an ally, right? Like, posting stuff on LinkedIn is great, and reading books is great, right? And actively supporting your Black employees in the office is great. But like, Black Lives Matter. Somebody in my office said, like, it wasn't a Spirit Week, right? Like there's not, it wasn't just one thing that happened. Like, this is you have to keep working. But the point is, like, understand that, like, you're gonna make mistakes, and when you do, like, don't cry your tears, like, keep working.
Right.
And own it, right? And say, oh my gosh, I didn't get it right. And can you help me? And just own that part, I think, is important. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about, we're so scared of getting it wrong and perfection. I think perfection is a dangerous thing, particularly when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, right? It's an ongoing journey. We're going to be frustrated. I say that again, and I want to remind people of that. And we have to go on this journey together and work together and own when we make mistakes. I mean, I learn something new every day in this work. Part of why I love it. Part of why it's my passion area, and I feel so blessed that I get to do this every day. But I know, like, I didn't get that right. I learned stuff just from sitting here talking to the three of you of like a different way to think about things. And I think that that's part of being an ally too, kind of that we started to play with this concept here at Cedars of cultural humility, instead of just focusing on cultural competency, but really thinking about cultural humility too. It's ongoing learning about cultures and being humble in the fact that you don't know everything. And that's okay, right? And I love that our chief nursing executive brought that to our executive D&I council a couple of weeks ago. And we all were like, that's exactly where we're at as an organization. We're continuing on this journey to learn together and being humble that we don't have all the answers. And I think that that's a perfect foundational thing to think about when we think about allyship and being an authentic ally too. If you want to be real, you're not going to get everything right. You're not perfect. So just own that.
Mm-hmm. We talk about if the intent is there and the right intent is there, then you have to give each other permission to be honest and make mistakes. And you learn more from the mistakes than you do from always being right. And so as long as we're not jumping on each other and saying, hey, you didn't say that right, and your tone wasn't correct, instead of what you're actually trying to achieve in the message, you have to keep that long term out.
Well, ally is the evolution of everything that's happening right now in our country. With the protests, which were necessary. Now it's time to protest in our organization, and that evolves into the ally. And the ally should evolve as well. So an ally, in my estimation, is somebody that will stand next to you, will ensure that you have a voice. If you're doing something, they want to know about it, how they can be an internal sponsor or a champion for you. And then to graduate into somebody that is going to work to dismantle a particular system, what Ryan talked about before. So looking deeply at the metrics of who's being hired, terminated, promoted, pay structures, all those types of things, that's somebody that's moving into the next level of the allyship. And it's got plenty of terms. You can Google it for yourself. I've heard the term accomplished thrown out there. It's the graduation of the necessity of the ally. The work that we're doing, the racial tension that we're in is going to require more allies, but they've got to show up the right way, right? So you can't rush in. I love what Ryan said, 0 from 100. Let's get a little more strategic. If you are willing to participate in this is a marathon. There's some things you need to know. There's an education. There's a way that you need to show up. And can I just be frank? It's not about you. So you have to be aware of how you show up, your imagery, what you project, your energy, in regards to a situation that pertains to me or somebody of color. And we can get in the way of our own selves. Sometimes it's not deliberate, but there's the term again, to be consciously unbiased, is to be aware. There are times where, be honest with yourself, it's about you. and it's not about the cause. So we need some maturity with the allyship. This can't be rogue out here and actually creating a worse situation than it already is.
There's a lot of self-reflection and self-education, I think, in the allyship journey too. So, you talked about listening and kind of the next level. I think in believing the stories that you're hearing, I think to get to that next level, you have to do a lot of work on yourself too, and do a lot of self-reflection and be comfortable in that. And I think that goes along with the not being perfect concept, right? And that humility concept too of, man, how am I feeling? Because, a lot of people, I think right now, they want to be allies. They don't know how to be. And then they are scared to ask the questions because it makes them feel uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. And it's that self-reflection of knowing that about yourself and maybe finding that one person that you do have a relationship with and say, I want to be an ally, but I just don't know how. I've done the self-reflection. I just don't know how to start this journey. And I think that's part too.
Nicole, speaking of that, so being an ally isn't just a white or a brown thing. Can Black people be allies?
Yes, of course. I think we can I think everybody can be an ally, to be honest, to different communities and even within your own community. So I think of myself, a lot of times I like to say I'm an elder millennial. I'm like the first or second year of the millennial generation. So I'm that lost generation where nobody knows what to do with us. So, sometimes I'm the youngest person in the room. Sometimes I'm the only woman in the room. And I am also biracial. I'm white and Black. And, I identify as a Black woman, particularly right now and what's going on in society. But I have a voice and a seat at the table where I can be an ally for generational conversations. I can be an ally when I look around and we might not have women in the room. I have that chance to be that voice. But I also think, when you look at the Black community and the LGBTQ plus community, so we have an amazing opportunity to be allies for each other there too, because sometimes it's, we don't do a good job of stepping up to our brothers and sisters who are different from us that are still part of our own community. And I think that is a really important thing to remember. One of the coolest things I've seen happen here in LA, on top of everybody coming together, we just finished Pride Month, and we would normally have a huge LA Pride parade here. We had a Black Lives Matter, tons of protests have been going on consistently around Los Angeles. And then the Pride Parade's canceled, but a group of Black LGBTQ leaders got together and did an all Black Lives Matter solidarity march. And it was amazing to see how many people came together and how we got to put a spotlight, particularly on Black trans lives that have been lost to police brutality as well. We have those commonalities, and it was a great way that both, the communities, though different, there's the intersectionality, got to come together and support each other and be a voice. And I think that we all have that opportunity. And in that self-reflection journey, that's where you get to kind of look at, where are your privileges? Where do you have a seat at the table, and how can you utilize those privileges to be that voice for the people who might not have that same seat that you do?
Ryan, you have some good points around intersectionality. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, two of the things that, the pandemic has brought about in George Floyd's murder is, like, I always think, like, allies, the word allies gets thrown around. We've talked about that, but also like intersectionality too. And, people, I'm thinking about it from so many different perspectives, right? I mean, I think, the focus on Black trans lives is huge because they're that community is so marginalized. And there was just another murder at the end of Pride. Another Black trans woman was just murdered, and that's 18 this year, and it's unacceptable, right? But this racism and that is front and center now has also shined light on Black trans lives too, but also that intersectionality of those two communities. But we also have to remember that, like, intersectionality isn't just about like your gender, your sexuality, right? It's your socioeconomic status. It's where you grew up. It's what neighborhoods you live in, and all of those things are super important to think about all of that. But we did an intersectionality chat in our office just a couple of days ago, and one of the panelists was my husband, and he's Black and he's an immigrant and he's gay, and he talks about those three things, but he talks about them from a place of power and a place of like also giving him this perspective that that maybe somebody that doesn't necessarily understand or know what their intersections are, like what that can do for you. So like, he feels like he's more compassionate about things. He feels like he's more empathetic because he's just able, for whatever, can't pinpoint on whatever that word is, but because of those intersections, like it's almost like he sees things, around this way as opposed to like right straight through. And it just gives that different perspective. But so, we've been talking a lot about that, and Pride Month we were able to really focus on that even more than we were before, but also thinking about like going back to what Nicole was saying about, allies within, can a Black person be an ally? And even within the LGBT community, like, we're not all allies for each other within that community. There's a lot of, stereotypes that are thrown around there. And, just because as a member of the LGBT community too, like I know I'm not the best ally, and I wouldn't even call myself an ally for honestly for the trans community. Just because I'm in this position doesn't mean that like I'm automatically an ally for everybody, because I have to go by my own words, which is like it's not self-defined. Allyship is not self-defined, and I don't know a trans person that has said, Ryan, you're an ally for me, right? So like I can't claim that. So but it's something that's like really has hit me even harder and been more in my face in the past several weeks as we've navigated through Pride Month and thought about it. So there's a lot of work that I still need to do, but in that community, in the LGBT community, whether you're an L, a G, a B, a T, there's a Q, there's still some, I don't know what the right word is, but like allyship is not always present within that community. And it's okay to like talk about it and own it. People should own it. That we've also mentioned that in terms of like when we think about racism and what our beliefs are and how we've, at least me as a white person, has benefited from systemic racism.
Adrian, you brought up a good point around thinking that what's the difference between an ally and an accomplice?
Again, to speak to that just a little bit, an ally is everything that we need to be in the positions that Ryan and Nicole and I are in. I think by default we are allies, and we stand in the gap and stand right next to individuals who, whatever particular reason it is, could it be race, could it be gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, being able differently, we're an ally. We stand next to those people. We ensure that there's education and there's forums to understand more about a particular race or particular type of people. That's an ally who's going to march right next to you. Again, if I were to use the term accomplice, that's a little more meaty. That's somebody who's working to dismantle a particular type of system that could exist. And we know that we've seen systems throughout our country, and those systems are permeated into our organizations. So somebody that doesn't look like me, who's part of meetings and conversations that I'm not privy to, who's at the table, interested in ensuring that there's equity, equality in policies, and willing to take that hit. I know in conversations that I've had that you can look at somebody who's willing to lose a little bit of their social status. This conversation about being an ally, it goes back to abolitionists who wanted to partner next to Frederick Douglass, or going back to Harriet Tubman. She needed allies as she navigated the woods. We need allies, but I think in the allyship, or the accomplishment, you need to understand exactly what it is that you're going to be a part of, so that to Ryan's point, which was a fantastic point, you can go from zero and burn out. I was reading a story online where a particular, it was a Black gay man. He believed that he had found an ally, began to share some things with that ally. That ally was good for a week, but then week 2, week 3, got back to being comfortable in that space. So this thing about being an ally is not something where you show up one week, it's the flavor of the month. Somebody said something, I can't recall, maybe it was Nicole, that talked about this being a spirit week, or maybe that was Ryan. This is that. This is not that. This is, we've all agreed that this is different. So you need to show up different and be prepared for the long haul. And the long haul looks like focus. If you want to be an ally, we can have that conversation. Let me ask you, what do you see some inequality in our organization? And what can you do? What influence can you have? Can you do some homework on other policies that other organizations have? And at your next meeting, raise your hand and make that suggestion. Get on the agenda and talk about it. That's somebody that's going to be an accomplice. It's going to go to the line and say that we need to change this policy. That's the level of, this is where this is all headed, right? Because my concern is, to be quite frank, the wound is going to close before the healing takes place, right? So before the stitches are put across that wound of racism, let it be open a little bit and let it be painful for everybody. But don't seal it up yet. And my concern is there'll be another death. There'll be a series of deaths. The unfortunate thing is, when you really look at this historically, these things are happening in 2s and 3s, right? Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. Just same thing that happened back in 2014, and even before that. So before that happens again, let's be in this painful, uncomfortable place for a while. Let's not get away from this too quickly. And that's kind of my concern. Don't want to move past this, because to the majority, it's really uncomfortable. It should be. And so let's stay in it for a while and allow that to fester and allow that to penetrate the bone marrow, so that as we move forward in this uncomfortable space, that's a journey in the marathon we already talked about, you have a reference point, and it's going to hurt for a while. Remember 9/11? When that took place, we all had to do our homework. We didn't even understand that another religion was at war with our country. I did a lot of homework. I asked a lot of questions. I went to a lot of public discussions. I had to do my homework so I can understand, what does this mean for me, my family, and for the organization I was working for at that time. Well, in the same capacity, there's a lot of homework that needs to be done, so that when we begin the protest of allyship in our organization, we have a pain point. We have an understanding. We understand that this is not, what did Ryan say? This is not Spirit Week. This is a marathon. And we all need to walk this thing together. So,
yeah. No, I love that. Great points. One of the things I talk about being an ally is essentially it means what privilege you're willing to give up that you have today to amplify someone else's voice, right? So, for example, I think the Reddit CEO or co-founder stepped down from a board seat, right? And it doesn't always have to be that dramatic. It's a combination of a lot of small things that happen together. So, like, for example, with your kids, you might not finish that ice cream cone because they want to finish it, right? Or for us, we've handed over our Instagram mic for the day and let somebody else amplify their voice. So how would you guys answer that question around that? What are you willing to give up to let others move ahead?
Yeah, I think for me, first it's understanding your own privilege, so you know what you're bringing to the table to possibly give up, because I think that sometimes minorities and people of color, we have a lot of barriers against us, but when we take a step back and we look at what privilege is, we also have privilege that we're bringing to the table, and we can use that to give others a voice. So, one thing for me, I'm a mom to a little guy, and I realize that I want to make sure that voices of other women are at the table to make sure that their experience of childbirth and just raising a child, particularly in a time like this, right, is a good one. So one of the things that I've been doing is asking a lot of questions of people from different backgrounds on what their challenges are, but giving them that chance to share those stories at the table that I normally would sit at, or bringing those stories directly to people who need to hear them. I think that's really important. And the other thing I think, and we heard in Obama's administration, like when women were in a meeting, they would amplify each other's voices, right? I think that those actions are things that I really try to look to do when I'm in meetings and when I'm in situations, to just kind of let other people shine. It doesn't have to be me. This is not, the journey of diversity and inclusion is bringing everybody along with us and making sure that everybody has a voice and that they feel like they can belong and be comfortable in being who they are. And for me, it's sometimes giving up all of my thoughts on that and amplifying the voices that can help make that happen a little bit quicker.
Love that.
Yeah, it's ever since you posed that question when we were chatting a couple of days ago, I haven't stopped thinking about it. And to be quite honest, I don't really have like a definitive answer on like what it is that I would give up. I think the first thing for me is to like recognize that, you know, I'm gay, but I'm a white male that has a ton of privilege. I may not have all of the rights of all of my straight friends as an LGBT person, but as a white man in the workplace in particular, like I have a lot of privilege, and I actually need to sit back and recognize that more and think about like, what am I doing internally at my organization that like have I stopped somebody else from an opportunity? But I don't think that I have. But again, like, you know, I don't have that perspective. So when I think about what I try to do as a person in diversity and inclusion is like what Nicole said, is how many different voices can I help bring to the table? How can I use my privilege as somebody that's diversity and inclusion and provide as many opportunities as I can to other people that don't look like me, people that don't identify like me, people that I think are leaders within the organization because of the work that they're doing for diversity and inclusion. How do I pull them along, and how do I bring them to the table? So I think about that from an ERG, an employee resource group perspective, and like all of those leads. I work with 16 different. I call them, you know, high potential, and they already are leaders across the organization. And like, what can I do for them? Like, even as simple as like, no, I think you need to send out that email. You need to put that message out in Slack. And sometimes they're like petrified just to put a message out in the general channel on Slack, because they're like, yeah, but everybody sees it. I'm like, I know. I want them to see you. They need to see you. They need to hear your voice. People are hearing me. They know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say diversity and inclusion is like the best thing ever. They don't want to hear that anymore. They want to hear you say it as a leader and what you're doing. So I try to do all that, but I don't have like that. Like this, I think I know what I want to give up, but I haven't said that yet to my company. So I think I need to, like, before I say it, like make sure my leader knows that like I'm gonna want to give this up. But I think about it in terms of like, I think what Alex Ohanian did is amazing, and I've spoken to some of my Black colleagues too that like really point to like talk about that as like I feel more people should be, you know, we should be doing that, and that like giving up those opportunities for others to amplify voices. Because one person actually too at my organization was like, it's not that I need a mentorship program. Like, I don't, you know, that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the people that are in those positions that got there that probably maybe don't deserve to be there. Like, they need to check themselves and check their privilege and check if they actually deserve to be there, because he's saying from my experience, they're the ones that have stopped me from getting to where they are right now. So like, I want them to have really hard conversations with themselves. So that could be me using my privilege, not maybe giving up something, but using my privilege to have those really hard conversations with those leaders around, like, you know, I think check your racist, like the way that you've sort of navigated through the system that has you taken advantage of it. How can you sort of step back and also help me provide those other opportunities for people within the organization?
Yeah.
Adrian, any thoughts around this?
The giving up piece. I see it kind of twofold. It's what am I willing to give up, and what am I asking others to give up? I'm asking others to give up comfort, right? That's quintessentially what we're all asking, is to get into this conversation and feel the sting of it. You know, it's uncomfortable. And I've led several sessions now just on race, racism, white privilege, white supremacy. It's uncomfortable for me to have to educate others on these terms, but we need you to be uncomfortable so it motivates you and propels you forward in eliminating structures that could prevent people of color from moving up in an organization. It's tough. So what I'm asking now to give up your comfort. Don't give it all up right in this 0 to 100 moment, because I'm gonna need you down the line. There may be a hill I need you to die on. So sit in the discomfort, right? And so that we can long-term this thing all the way out. And we need for people to be strategic. Ryan or Nicole had mentioned, take care of yourself. You know, I need you for the long haul. Don't go and lose your job on this. but definitely be an advocate and somebody willing. And you know what? To ask the ally that or the accomplice is uncomfortable for them. And we have to recognize that. Now, in regards to me, Ryan and Nicole already spoke to me. I don't have to have a voice in the matter. I need for others to have a voice, because what I've been educated on is that diversity isn't just me, inclusion isn't just me, it's my entire organization. So I need for others to see some of these amazing people that I work with at Premier Health who have a voice, they know how to use it, and they're willing to send out an email, maybe a little bit of coaching, a little bit of mentoring, but it can't just be, that's the burnout with the work that Ryan and Nicole and I do, is that you can be burnt out on this. We're passionate about it. We'll go the extra mile, the extra 3 miles on this stuff, but we also have to be conscious of what other champions do we have out there. I was having this conversation with myself right before this began, is what others in my organization that I need to tap into in order to move the work along at a different clip, to reimagine and re-engineer the work, because all this conversation about racism has definitely, and I'm sure Ryan and Nicole can attest to this, we already had a diversity plan in place. We were already doing work. And then the racism, and we're so thankful for this new energy.
Yeah.
But man, it's packed. And we need other advocates. We need allies. And we all need to bask in the beauty of being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Nicole, can you talk to me about health equity you mentioned in the beginning?
Oh, yeah. Well, we're a healthcare organization. So, thinking about racism and that impact on health equity for our patients is really, our focus here at Cedars Sinai. And, the beauty of, to Adrian's point, we had some things that were already in place, and we were working towards looking at some of our gaps where we have opportunities to help close those gaps. Now we're at a point of, we've identified some things. How do we start to have more dialogue, more conversations to create countermeasures to close those that are sustainable? That's the key. Not something that's going to happen overnight. So, we're doing work around Black maternal health. We're looking at some of our senior patients and making sure that they're supported in their journey as they age. And I think that discussing those things is important. We found that we have so much phenomenal work happening here at Cedars Sinai, but we didn't put a spotlight on it. We didn't talk about it. We didn't kind of let everybody know all the work that's been happening. It's not that we don't want to toot our own horn. We're a very humble organization. We're founded on the fact that we're a Jewish hospital, right? And we were founded on the fact that Jewish doctors could not practice in hospitals back in the day, which is why Cedars Sinai exists. So we exist on being an inclusive organization. And now we're realizing that can carry on. That foundation carries on into the work of health equity into other communities, looking at the trans community and making sure, especially with all of the current administration and the rollbacks of health protection that's coming up, we have a great transgender surgery program here at Cedars Sinai. Making sure that we're continuing to evolve that, we're communicating that, we're answering the questions and requests of our patients. So we're trying to really bring a spotlight on not only the research that's being done on the health equity side, but the work that we're doing too at a broader level, internally and externally. We have so much great work happening. We just haven't done a good job of talking about it. And I think, as much as I hate to say racism helped put a spotlight on that work and made us a little more comfortable saying, oh, we do need to talk about this. I think it's a good thing. Yeah. So it is how we are trying to tackle the racism aspect from an equity standpoint.
I agree. Let's open up to questions. Your last thoughts. Let's see if anyone has anything they want to ask us. Looks like it's not. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. So last thoughts for each of you. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll go. One of the things that going back to our topic around authentic allyship, I think people just need to realize and remember, if there's one thing, it's what I say in my organization, is that allyship is not self-defined and you have to do the work. Also, thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks to Nicole, big time. I'm a huge Nicole fan, and now I'm a Ryan fan. Tell me where to get a hat at, Ryan. I'm gonna tell you the evolution of everything that we've seen in our nation over the last month it's got to turn into the evolution of the ally. That's how it continues. And that's the ask. We need the evolution.
Well, I will say I'm a fan of all three of you, and I'm so thankful that I got to do this session and hear from all of you. I have some new talking points floating around in my mind for sure. I think my closing statement is two parts. This is all going to happen a tick at a time. I know people in my organization have been hearing me say that, and I think it's important for us to remember it is a marathon, not a sprint. And I had the great fortune to do some of this work at Honda. That's where actually I was at Honda when Adrian and I first met. And within my first 2 weeks there, I had somebody who I consider a mentor share this tidbit of information with me. And I think it's great for D&I people to remember, but it's also phenomenal for people on this allyship journey, is we have to celebrate the small wins, right? And this is long, hard work. We're all part of it, but we also have to say, man, if we had this open dialogue, that's a win on our journey, and that's a tick on that journey's on that schedule. So I think celebrate the small wins. It'll add up to that finish line eventually, but it's important to celebrate.
Thank you, guys. That was amazing. So honored to have you both all on the show.
Thank you.
Happy 4th of July, everybody.
Yeah.
Happy 4th of July.
Bye.
Bye.